Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my NFL playoff predictions for the 2023 season, and of course, determining which team will be capturing the ever-elusive Vince Lombardi trophy. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be filling out an NFL playoff bracket on a per-game basis, giving you guys my perspective and opinions, and of course, a couple statistics that have helped me determine who I believe is going to win the Super Bowl this season. Now, before we get into today's video, I'm going to be using the website called My Playoff Picks. I've linked it down in the comment section as the pinned comment. If you would like to go ahead and use this website yourself, you can go ahead and travel there. Now, once you've gone ahead and filled out your bracket, let me know down in the comment section who you believe is going to be capturing the Vince Lombardi trophy this season. Now, besides giving you guys a couple statistics over the course of today's video, I'll also be going ahead and sharing a couple potential entries that I will be making via PrizePicks this upcoming weekend for Wild Card Weekend. Again, for those of you who haven't checked them out already, there's also a link down in the description via PrizePicks. You can go ahead, use promo code Andrew today, and even though the fantasy football season is over, we can continue to play daily fantasy at our fingertips via PrizePicks, picking more or less on given player statistics. I've gone ahead and curated one singular selection minimum for each of these contests going into the weekend that you could potentially take advantage of, put together some entries, and win some money. So go ahead, travel to their website, use promo code Andrew today, because when you use promo code Andrew, your first time deposit is immediately doubled. So go ahead and check that out. Thank you very much. All right. So let's get into talking about the NFL playoffs. The interesting thing about Wild Card Weekend is that each of these teams have already played each other once this season minimum. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a perspective as to what we could potentially witness. Of course, some of those games more recent, some of them earlier on in the season. Either way, let's go ahead and begin by talking about the Miami Dolphins taking on the Buffalo Bills, the number 2 versus the number 7 seed. The Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins, of course, have already played each other twice this season. It's a 1-1 split between these two in this given matchup. Of course, the Miami Dolphins won earlier this season in Week 3, in which they won 21-19. While later on in the season, in Week 15, in Buffalo, we saw a very heavy weather game in which the Buffalo Bills were able to escape with a 32-29 victory. Now, in both of those circumstances, Tua Tagovailoa was the active starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. But unfortunately, going into this upcoming weekend's game, we will not see Tua. With that being the case, Skylar Thompson is most likely going to be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. And not only are we going to see Tua Tagovailoa missing, we're also likely to see Raheem Mostert miss this game due to the fact that he sustained a quote-unquote serious thumb injury against the New York Jets just this last week. Therefore, if you're starting running back and of course your starting quarterback are going to be out, your offense is pretty much nullified. And going up against a team like the Buffalo Bills that certainly are going to pour it on this defense, it is going to make it extremely difficult for the Miami Dolphins to compete, much less win this game. I mean, when we look at how well Josh Allen has played up against this defense, and just in general how well the Bills have played as of late, they're coming off of a 7-game winning streak, and Josh Allen in the last 2 contests against the Miami Dolphins this season, 704 passing yards and 6 passing touchdowns. Not only that, in those 2 games against the Miami Dolphins, the Buffalo Bills had a 60% third down conversion rate, 19 for 32, while on the other end, the Dolphins had a 36% third down conversion rate, 8 for 22. And that was with Tua Tagovailoa under center. Imagine with Skylar Thompson, a guy that really cannot push the issue down the field and allow Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to help this team. Unfortunately, the injury to Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the determining factor here. We also have Micah Hyde, who could potentially be returning this week. He's a 2-time All-Pro safety, and even if he doesn't return this week, it could certainly help this team for the future. So as of right now, I am predicting that the Buffalo Bills will end up winning the first-round wildcard weekend matchup against their division rival in the Miami Dolphins. Now, specifically, before we move on, I want to talk about potential PrizePick entries, specifically with Dawson Knox going into this upcoming weekend. You guys have heard me say it all season long in regards to fantasy. The Miami Dolphins defense are one of the worst defenses in the league in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. Thus far this season, the Miami Dolphins have allowed 124 targets, 98 receptions, 954 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends in 17 games. That's about 7.3 targets, 5.8 receptions, 56 receiving yards, and 0.6 receiving touchdowns per game. Overall, pretty great statistics. Knox in week 15 going up against this defense had himself a fantastic game of 8 targets, 6 receptions, 98 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for 18.8 fantasy points. Overall, Dawson Knox has put up great fantasy production in the course of the last month, having scored a single touchdown in each of those 4 games minimum. In my opinion, Dawson Knox going more than 32.5 receiving yards is an automatic, especially considering the fact that he's becoming, of course, Josh Allen's #1 red zone target, but over the course of the last back half of the season has been utilized more and more within this offense, which is great to see. Dawson Knox is an automatic more going up against this Miami Dolphins defense. And let's talk about the AFC matchup between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens. Now, both of these teams have already played each other twice this season. Of course, division rivals once again in the playoffs. Earlier this season in week 4, in which, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals ended up losing 23-20 to the Baltimore Ravens when Lamar Jackson was under center. And then most recently in week 18, just last week, we saw the Cincinnati Bengals defeat the Baltimore Ravens 27-16, while Anthony Brown, the third string quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, was starting in that given game. Overall, I think this is going to be a one-sided affair in which the Cincinnati Bengals captured this victory. The primary reason why I believe that's going to be the case is because of the absence of Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson was active, healthy, we'd have no problem predicting that the Baltimore Ravens could potentially win this game. But unfortunately, we haven't seen Lamar play since week 13, in which he sustained his PCL injury. And since then has not practiced, and even this week has not practiced. Therefore, we are expecting Tyler Huntley, the backup quarterback for this team, to be the starter. Now, this is the second playoff game in a row where we're talking about a second string or third string quarterback having to play under center against a really competitive football team. And unfortunately, it's not going to be enough in my mind. The Cincinnati Bengals are one of the hottest teams in the National Football League on a current 8-game winning streak. Even though Joe Burrow has struggled mightily against his defense over the course of the 2 games that he's taken them on, only putting up 432 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns in those 2 contests, I truly do expect the Cincinnati Bengals to be able to take this game into their own hands and dictate their future. The Baltimore Ravens, without much of a semblance of an offense, considering they'll have Tyler Huntley there, will only be able to benefit if, in fact, the Cincinnati Bengals give away this game in regards to special teams and or defensive touchdowns and, of course, Joe Burrow turning over the ball. If those things can happen, of course, the Baltimore Ravens could have a shot at winning this game. I just believe there would be too much momentum that would have to go in the favor of the Baltimore Ravens in order for them to win this game. Even though they have been one of the better teams defensively over the course of the last back half of the season since they acquired Roquan Smith. I mean, as of late, they've been able to dominate in terms of stopping the run. And in terms of all defenses in the National Football League, they've allowed the 3rd fewest points per game, which is 18.5. They've played incredibly as a defense, but unfortunately, without an offense, you cannot beat a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, and that is my belief. Now, the only other thing that I wanted to, go ahead and mention before we continue on with another AFC matchup here is the regard of Joe Mixon and his potential prize pick entry number in terms of receiving yards going into this upcoming weekend. It is currently set at 24.5, and the reason why I wanted to specifically mention this is because Joe Mixon has been able to accomplish this number and surpass this number in 9 of his 14 games this season. When you go ahead and talk about the fact that the Baltimore Ravens have been one of the best run-stopping defenses in the National Football League, it will continue to force Joe Burrow to have to sit back in the pocket and dump it off and check down in the direction of Joe Mixon, which he has done a lot as of late. I'm expecting Joe Mixon to get himself a lot of opportunities on the ground, but once that begins to slow down, of course, the check down game and, of course, getting him more and more opportunities in the receiving game is certainly going to be important for his overall upside. I expect him to go more than 26 receiving yards in this contest and to be able to do that very early on so that we're not really stressing going forward. All right, now that we've covered that, we're going to go ahead and pick the Cincinnati Bengals and move on and talk about another AFC matchup in regards to the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. This may be one of the hardest matchups to predict. Either way, I think regardless of who ends up winning this game, they will ultimately lose to the Chiefs. That being said, I think between these two teams, if in fact we can get a healthy Mike Williams active going into this weekend's game, I truly believe that the Los Angeles Chargers would end up winning this game. But if in fact the stupid decision-making of one Brandon Staley is going to bite them in the butt and come back to really hurt this team, and if Mike Williams does not participate, he's one of the biggest determining factors as to whether or not this team can go ahead and take a top off an opposing defense and stretch the field. If you're not going to stretch the field, safeties are going to be playing a lot tighter, and there's going to be a lot less success in the running game. And hey, listen, if you want to throw the ball to Keenan Allen 10 times, that's fantastic. They're going to allow you to do so. But when you have the ability to take the top off the defense with Mike Williams and make big plays, they want to go ahead and limit those plays as much as possible. But when you don't have the possibility of him even being on the field, it makes it that much more difficult to game plan as an offense. That being said, in this current circumstance, I'm going to be more optimistic and hope that Mike Williams will be healthy and be able to play this game. Therefore, I expect the Los Angeles Chargers to be able to defeat the Jacksonville Jaguars, even in Jacksonville. Now, in regards to potential prize pick entries going into this upcoming weekend, I think Travis Etienne's current number of 75.5 rushing yards, I believe that's an automatic more. Again, I always want to pick more. I always want to hope that these players can go beyond their overall player statistics. But in this current circumstance, this is an automatic in my eyes. We've been able to see Travis Etienne accomplish this number in 3 out of his last 4 games that he has participated in. Of course, this last week against the Tennessee Titans was a complete disaster because no one can find success running the ball against the Titans. But the 3 prior games, we've seen a lot of opportunity and a lot of production go in the direction of Travis Etienne. Therefore, I'm expecting him to be able to dominate this Los Angeles Chargers run-stopping defense that is non-existent at times. Thus far this season, they have allowed 386 rushing attempts and 2,158 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs this season in 17 games. There have been 12 different running backs thus far this season that have accumulated 85 or more rushing yards against the Los Angeles Chargers in their 17 games. I'm expecting to see a lot of production go in the direction of Travis Etienne and him definitely be a determining factor in this game. But ultimately, I truly do believe that the Los Angeles Chargers barely squeak out with a victory here on the AFC. Now, if we continue on with some of these AFC matchups, talking about the Chargers versus the Chiefs, typically, these two teams have played very closely within each other's means over the course of the last couple seasons. Specifically, earlier this year, the Chiefs won 30-27 and 27-24. Both contests determined by one score. Now, even if you go back to 2021, we saw the Kansas City Chiefs win 34-28, another one-score game. And of course, we saw the Los Angeles Chargers win 30-24, a one-score game. So if in fact this comes to fruition, we should expect a one-score game and an exciting matchup between these two teams, division rivals, who of course have played closely over the last couple of years. That being said, I do expect the Kansas City Chiefs to win this game. But if in fact we get into a situation where Mike Williams is fully healthy and there's no setback and he can actually be at a full competitive rate, there could be an argument where the Los Angeles Chargers could squeak away with a victory if in fact the Kansas City Chiefs coming off their bye week could be a little lackluster. That being said, I do expect the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the best teams in the National Football League, to take this and end up winning this contest. Now, we have the Buffalo Bills taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. This is an extremely difficult matchup to predict. But in this current circumstance, I do expect the Cincinnati Bengals to end up prevailing in this matchup. The primary reason why I think so is because the Bills' defense, in my mind, is a liability. Over the course of the last couple weeks here, we have seen their run-stop defense be irrelevant, and as of late have certainly struggled in terms of stopping the pass. When you can't stop the running, you can't stop the pass, and your defense as a whole really isn't causing too many turnovers, in my mind, that leads to potential for the Cincinnati Bengals coming out in this game. And even with the fact that this game is going to be played in Buffalo, it is going to be definitely a cold weather game. I don't think we're worried about that. So I'm expecting this game to be certainly competitive, but I do believe that the Cincinnati Bengals will end up winning this contest. Now, we have the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. Here's the fact of the matter. The Cincinnati Bengals have been able to best the Kansas City Chiefs in each of their last 3 contests. Whether it was during the regular season this year or last year, or whether it was even in last season's playoffs to determine who was going to the Super Bowl. In this current circumstance, I believe that the Cincinnati Bengals are the kryptonite to Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm expecting the Cincinnati Bengals for a second consecutive year to go to the Super Bowl. All right, now let's talk about the other side of this bracket. Let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Seattle Seahawks. These two teams took each other on, of course, twice earlier this season, division rivals. The first game in week 2, the San Francisco 49ers won 27-7. And in the second game, most recently back in week 15, in which the San Francisco 49ers won 21-13. Now, the only reason the San Francisco 49ers put up a mere 21 points overall was because it was a short Thursday Night Football week in which, of course, they weren't fully healthy. But now that they're getting back to being fully healthy and this offense is really catching their stride, besides that 21-point game, since Brock Purdy has taken over this offense, their team totals in terms of per game, 33 points, 35, 37, 37, and 38. The San Francisco 49ers have been able to boat race teams and completely dominate on both sides of the football. Besides their offense getting back healthy players with Deebo Samuel, Elijah Mitchell, and of course the services of George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Christian McCaffrey playing out of their mind as of late, the defense has been legendary as of late. There's a reason why this team is on a 10-game winning streak. The 49ers defense are one of the best teams at stopping the run. And going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, in which there should be rain in California, this should lead to both teams running the ball. We all know that San Francisco 49ers love to run the ball, and so do the Seattle Seahawks. But if the Seattle Seahawks run into the wall that is the San Francisco 49ers defense, it is going to be difficult for them to potentially win this game. In 9 out of the last 10 games that the San Francisco 49ers have played, they have allowed 80 or fewer rushing yards. Specifically, just to give you some perspective, 56, 51, 67, 63, 33, 69, 70, 79, and 61. They really haven't given up much on the ground to opposing running backs. And not only that, now when we want to specifically talk about legendary defenses, the San Francisco 49ers are the first team in NFL history to have an 8 consecutive game streak of allowing 70 or fewer rushing yards to an opposing offense. That in itself should give you an idea as to how difficult it should be for the Seattle Seahawks to win this upcoming weekend. Not to mention that the Seattle Seahawks this season, in the games in which they've ran for 70 or fewer rushing yards, they have been winless this season. Therefore, I truly do believe that the San Francisco 49ers, with their rushing attack, with the offensive pieces that they have, to be able to succeed against their division rival once again this season for the 3rd consecutive time. And let's not forget to mention the Seattle Seahawks defense. They've struggled mightily this season, especially against opposing running backs. Thus far this season, on a per-game basis, they've allowed 115 rushing yards per game, 43 receiving yards per game, and 1 touchdown per game to opposing running backs. There's going to be a lot of production this week, not only from Christian McCaffrey, but of course, Elijah Mitchell. Now, speaking of Elijah Mitchell, going into this upcoming weekend, I expect Elijah Mitchell to very easily be able to surpass 36.5 rushing yards. He's been able to accomplish this in 4 out of his last 5 games that he's participated in, and truly going into this upcoming weekend's matchup, due to the weather concerns, and of course, the fact that the Seattle Seahawks cannot stop the run, if we get into a one-sided affair, where this is a high-scoring game from the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks can't put together an offense, this is going to be a lot of garbage time in which Elijah Mitchell will be allowed to run the ball and dictate the game in the second half after Christian McCaffrey has already done his damage to this defense. All right, now that that has been covered, let's go ahead. Let's pick the San Francisco 49ers and move on to the next matchup between the Minnesota Vikings and, of course, the New York Giants. Now, this is an interesting one. I'm in the minority in terms of picking who is going to win this game. I believe the New York Giants have a very high likelihood of winning this game. Earlier this season, these two teams took each other on. The Minnesota Vikings at home barely won 27-24. And to be totally honest, the New York Giants gave them that victory. There have been many of circumstances in which the Minnesota Vikings have been gifted victories, but this is one of the more egregious ones. In this contest, we saw the New York Giants have 7 penalties for 63 yards, while the Minnesota Vikings only had 2 penalties for 14 yards. We saw the third down conversion rate for the New York Giants be 3 for 11, 27% conversion rate on third down. Absolutely atrocious. I think they're certainly going to improve that number. And not only that, in terms of turnovers, the New York Giants had 2 turnovers, while the Minnesota Vikings had 0 in that game. If you go ahead and clean up those mistakes, whether it's penalties, whether it's turnovers, whether it's third down conversion and effectiveness as an offense, we're going to be in a position where the New York Giants could very easily win this game. Now, the primary reason why I believe that is going to be the case is because if you go and you look around and you see what Vegas has this game at, they have the Minnesota Vikings as a very close, only 3-point favorite, even at home, with a significantly better record. That isn't by accident, it's by design, considering the fact that the Minnesota Vikings have barely beaten a lot of teams in the National Football League. Earlier this season, the Minnesota Vikings set the NFL record for most victories in a season by 1 score, 11 total victories. That is an absolutely ridiculous number. Not only that, the Minnesota Vikings ended this season with a -3 differential in terms of total points scored versus allowed. The Minnesota Vikings have been scored on a lot by opposing teams, and even though they've been able to squeak out with some victories, they've certainly given up their fair share of points. Now, the New York Giants aren't, completely out of that conversation either. I think the New York Giants are very much so a very similar team in terms of allowing a lot of points to be scored on them and barely winning a lot of one-score, potential contests. Specifically, they have won 8 games this season by 1 score. While I also found that 13 of their total games were decided by 1 score, 8 of them, of course, victories, 5 of them defeats. I truly do believe that the New York Giants have a very good opportunity on hand to end up pulling out this victory. Now, the Minnesota Vikings defense this season, they've allowed the 2nd most yards and the 5th most points per game amongst all teams in the National Football League. Amongst all the teams in the playoffs right now, they're amongst the highest in terms of those statistics. It is truly going to require that Kirk Cousins and this offense scores a boatload of points in order to fend off the efforts of the New York Giants. And even with Daniel Jones not having as many incredible weapons like a Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, he's still going to be able to get the job done with Saquon Barkley, Richie James Jr., Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton. I truly do believe they're up for the task at hand. And to be totally honest, I think Brian Daboll could very easily outcoach Kevin O'Connell in this circumstance. Before we move on and I pick the New York Giants, I want to remind you guys, there's a potential prize pick entry currently right now with Richie James at 47.5 receiving yards. If you can go ahead and get this at this current number, it's an automatic more in my eyes, considering the fact that thus far this season, the season high receiving yardage total that Richie James has put forward was against the Minnesota Vikings back in week 16. He had 90 receiving yards in that game. He typically plays in the slot position, like 80% of his overall routes that he runs, and he will typically be taking on Chandon Sullivan. Chandon Sullivan, as a slot cornerback this season, a nickel, has given up the most receptions to opposing slot receivers and the most receiving yards to opposing slot receivers amongst all nickel corners in the National Football League. So when we take that into account and the fact that Richie James Jr. had 5 receptions and 78 receiving yards against Chandon Sullivan the last time he took on this defense, leads me to believe that Richie James Jr. very easily surpasses that number. And with those efforts, I'm expecting the New York Giants to put together a performance that could potentially help them beat the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming weekend. All right, now the final matchup for the wild card weekend are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Here's the fact of the matter. I don't trust the Dallas Cowboys at all. The last 2 seasons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have taken on the Dallas Cowboys. Tampa Bay has won both times. I know earlier this season in week 1, Dak had to leave that game early due to the thumb injury, but even prior to that injury, he did not play well. The fact of the matter is, the Dallas Cowboys earlier this season were hanging their hat on the fact that this defense was elite. And they were game changers and they were helping them win games, especially when Dak was out with injury. This defense as a whole was dominating. As of late, the last month of the season, they're allowing 25.5 points per game as a defense. That is a terrible number. Therefore, if we're getting to a conversation in which you're going to allow Tom Brady, the GOAT, to go up against one of the worst defenses in the National Football League, especially considering the fact that Dak Prescott has turned the ball over 15 times. He led the league in interceptions this season, having only played 12 games. If you're going to have a bad defense, on top of the fact that your offense has the ability to turn over the ball as highly as they do, there is that much more opportunity for Tom Brady to take advantage of this. A quarterback who is coming off of a season in which he set the NFL record for the most passing attempts and passing completions in a year by a quarterback. They're going to air it out. And even if the running game does not come together for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, all they really have to do is sit Leonard Fournette in the backfield and have him chip block on Michael Parsons every single time he pass rushes. Because if you can keep Tom Brady clean, nobody else is going to be able to get to him. And once they end up accomplishing that, there should be a very high likelihood of Tampa Bay keeping this a low-scoring game for sure, but being able to compete. I mean, just look at the quarterbacks that the Dallas Cowboys have given up a boatload of points and yards to as of late. Sam Howell, Joshua Dobbs, Gardner Minshew, all 3 of those quarterbacks are backups in the National Football League. And I would even argue that Joshua Dobbs and Sam Howell are 3rd-string quarterbacks in the National Football League. There is a very high likelihood in my eyes that with a healthy Tampa Bay team coming off of a little bit of momentum in which their starting team was able to find a lot of success against the Atlanta Falcons, while on the other end of the spectrum, the Dallas Cowboys completely got slaughtered by the Washington Commanders, all that momentum is going to lead into the playoffs. Now, I do believe that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers take this victory, but let's talk about potential prize picks. Specifically, number 1, Dalton Schultz at 38.5 receiving yards. I think that is an automatic more. In the 2 games in which Dalton Schultz have taken on this defense in the last 2 seasons, 6 catches for 45 and 7 catches for 62. We already know that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they give up their fair share of points to opposing tight ends. This season have allowed 82 receptions, 828 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends. That's 48.71 yards per game on average. I think there's a very high likelihood that we see Dalton Schultz certainly surpass this number based on how much utilization he gets within this offense and how easy the matchup is in terms of allowing him to dominate against these linebackers in coverage. Now, when we talk about another player that I specifically like for the Dallas Cowboys, it is Dak Prescott, going more than 34.5 passing attempts. The primary reason why I'm going more on this current number is because, again, if they want to compete, they're going to have to succeed in the passing game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are capable of stopping this onslaught of rushing attack that the Cowboys have imposed upon other defenses. Yet, if in fact we can see Vita Vea healthy, and of course this run-stop defense stop Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard in their tracks, we may be in a conversation in which Dak Prescott's going to have to air it out. Dak Prescott has been able to surpass 34.5 passing attempts in 4 out of his last 5 games. Now, specifically earlier this season, in the 4 games in which the Dallas Cowboys were limited to less than 100 rushing yards, Dak Prescott always had more than 34.5 passing attempts. Therefore, if we're going to get into a conversation here where this running game is going to fall apart, and we're going to see Dak Prescott have to carry this team with his arm, This number is very achievable in my eyes. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, besides talking about Dak Prescott, I want to mention Tom Brady in terms of his passing attempts for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Going into this upcoming weekend, his current number is at 42.5. He's been able to accomplish that in 6 consecutive games and has specifically been able to accomplish more in 9 out of his last 11 games. Like I mentioned earlier, he was able to set the record earlier this season with most completions and passing attempts by a quarterback in a single season, surpassing Matthew Stafford's record. I think Tom Brady was able to accumulate 733 passing attempts this season. The prior record was 727 by Matthew Stafford. Pretty crazy numbers. Either way, I'm expecting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to very easily take this upcoming week. Now, we move on to the next round here. Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. Both these teams have played each other twice. Even though I do expect this to be a little bit more competitive, the Philadelphia Eagles are a very difficult team to defeat. Let's just put this in perspective. The Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, in my opinion, is so dominant that they're going to be able to dictate this game by themselves. When we talk about run block win rate at their exact position, Jordan Mailata is the number 2 overall player in terms of run blocking win rate at the tackle position. Landon Dickerson, the number 1 guard in the National Football League at that rate. Jason Kelce, the number 2 center at that rate. Now, when we talk about pass block success rates at their exact position, at tackle, Lane Johnson, number 1 at the position. Landon Dickerson, number 2 at the guard position. Jason Kelce, number 6 at the center position. They have one of the best offensive lines in the National Football League. This is something that I've been mentioning all season long. And when you get, of course, this secondary of the New York Giants, of course, going up against Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Devonta Smith, and of course, A.J. Brown, they're going to have their hands full, besides the fact that the running game for Miles Sanders and the rest of the boys in the backfield with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott is certainly going to find success. I'm expecting the Philadelphia Eagles to come away with this victory. Now we move on to the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even though I do expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win that, wild card weekend matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, I do not expect this team to be competitive enough to be able to defeat the San Francisco 49ers. Earlier this season, we witnessed these two teams play, and it was a blowout. And the San Francisco 49ers put up a pretty number on this defense. I'm expecting a very similar outcome, even though Tom Brady, the GOAT, he is what he is, but the team that surrounds him really isn't as competitive as it was in seasons past. Therefore, I'm expecting the San Francisco 49ers to continue their journey into the NFC Championship game, in which they'll take on the Philadelphia Eagles. I said it earlier in regards to the Jaguars versus the Los Angeles Chargers being a difficult matchup to determine, but I think this might be probably the most difficult matchup overall. Even in my notes, I wrote down San Francisco 49ers win, but even at this moment, I'm doubting that. I truly do believe this is going to be a very competitive matchup. It depends who's going to be starting at the quarterback position for the San Francisco 49ers. Both these teams have a boatload of incredible volume of weapons at their disposal. But the issue is, I don't know who's playing quarterback for the 49ers. I don't know what that momentum is going to hold. And with so many questions in my mind looming, I'll take the San Francisco 49ers potentially losing this game to the Philadelphia Eagles and Jalen Hurts taking his team to the promised land. So, we have the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl game. I think, is it in Arizona this year? Between these two teams, I think it's going to be very difficult for me to expect Joey Burrow to get back to the Super Bowl and not hoist the Lombardi Trophy at the end of it. Therefore, I am picking the Cincinnati Bengals to win the Super Bowl this season, and that is my bracket as such. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Again, I mentioned a couple PrizePicks. You can go ahead and travel to their website, check out other potential PrizePick entries that you can make, picking more or less on given player statistics. Again, it's just like fantasy football. We're trying to predict the potential successes or failures of players. I typically try to lean towards being a little bit more optimistic and not try to pick less on some of their overall statistics, but in some circumstances I have and I will. But as of this current moment in time, we're picking more on those numbers. If you guys are interested, be sure to check them out today. Use promo code Andrew today when you sign up, because your first time deposit is immediately doubled when using promo code Andrew. There's a link down in the description for those of you who want to go ahead and check that out. Also, if you guys want to go ahead and fill out your own bracket, let me know down in the comment section who you believe is going to be winning the Vince Lombardi Trophy this season. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section. I've gone ahead and linked the overall website, myplayoffpicks.com. down in the comment section. So if you want to go ahead, click that link, fill out your bracket, and let me know what is kind of panned out for you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate it. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.